Last Friday I went to San Quentin prison to teach. And for those of you who don't know, San Quentin is a maximum security prison. It's a huge prison. It's immense. And I went to there's many different cell blocks. And the cell block I went to had most of the people in that cell block were lifers, which means they were probably 95% of them were never going to get out of prison the rest of their life. And I came there to talk to a couple of groups came together that have been meeting, groups of guys. One of them had been practicing meditation together, and the other one had been, can't really remember exactly what the other group was about, but they came together and I was invited by someone to go and speak to them. And it's quite amazing to speak with a group of people who are very certain that they're not going to find happiness or peace outside of themselves. It's amazing to speak with a group of people who have nothing invested in the future. They have no future to look forward to. Most of them have no future of getting out. The only future they have, at least on the outside, is the same that happened yesterday and the day before and the day before and the day before and the day before and the day before. And so it will continue as long as probably as long as they're alive for most of them. And so, amazing thing, it occurred to me during my visit there that in spirituality we talk a lot about the futility of finding ultimate peace, happiness outside of oneself. And yet, most everybody I meet tries to do just that. We do it until we find out it doesn't work. And of course, there is happiness to be found in exterior things, and there's enjoyable moments. But when we talk about real happiness, a lasting happiness, or a lasting peace, in spirituality for generations it's been talked about how to seek it outside of yourself is ultimately a futile endeavor, and yet then most people do it anyway. And to meet with a group of people who have to confront the stark reality of spending the rest of their lives in prison, and so therefore are not looking for happiness on the outside, certainly not in the outside circumstances. They have no hope for a better future. And most people, of course, this would terrify. The mere thought of it would terrify most people, to be confined like that. It always terrifies the ego when it thinks it no longer has hope for a better future. That's what fuels ego, is future. That's what keeps it going, is that maybe tomorrow will be better than today. Without that, egos get very depressed, at best. Very nasty at worst. Of course, the group of men that I was talking to were a relatively very small group within this vast population of this prison. They were a relatively small group of men who had really, in various ways, had come to an inward search. Many men in that prison still hadn't gotten to that point. And so they were a relatively small group of men, 45 or so. And yet, what a pleasure to speak with them, to speak with anybody, but since I'd never been to a prison, what an amazing pleasure it was, what good fortune it was to be able to go into this prison and speak with these people who were really genuinely no longer looking on the outside. really amazing when you meet somebody who's really, truly not looking on the outside for their peace, for their happiness. As you can imagine, I could tell when we first gathered together, there was a time of about probably 20 minutes or so where different people in the group just sort of shared where they were at. And as you could imagine, it sounded like everyone that I heard it had come from some horrendous past, which probably contributed to their eventually ending up in this prison. And so, a group of people with very difficult pasts had probably done some very nasty things to get themselves to the position they were in, and now ready and really willing to start to look within. One man there who had actually been paroled by the prison parole board on three separate occasions, and then denied by the governor, whoever the governors were at those times, on three separate occasions. At least one of them, he found out that his parole was denied on the very day he was supposed to go home. And he talked about an experience he had while in solitary confinement. And solitary confinement there means very, 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 very small room, about the size of a closet, with no communication, with no getting out, no walks, no interaction with other inmates, very little light, no reading material, nothing to occupy your time with at all. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, week after week, month after month after month. And he talked about finally having come into this solitary confinement for months. And for him it took that solitary confinement, months of being confined in this way. And he said, after a few months, I actually started to look inside. And I stopped blaming everybody for my problems and the world for my difficulties. And he told this beautiful story of realizing one day while he was in solitary, after he'd been introspecting for quite some time, and realizing this amazing light within himself. And he was an amazing person because as he spoke it, of course, you could sense this was actually a human being who had really awoken to the divine light. And he sat there and told his story of realizing the divine light and what it was like to fall in love with everything, with solitary confinement, with himself, when he got out, with every prisoner he met. As he said, I even fell in love with the prisoners that I didn't like. And another of the inmates talked about just beginning to find peace when he finally let go of the idea that he might get out someday. And this is an example of finding out of the ego letting go of its future and finding peace through letting go of the future. Which reminded me, while I was in there, of another inmate I've gotten to know through letters, another inmate from Florida who writes, and he had a very deep spiritual awakening while in solitary confinement as well, and now he spends his time referring to the prison as his monastery. So if you ever wondered if the power of perception is one can perceive an environment as hell or confining,